Greetings, friends. So last video, we saw a fairly cohesive little mini episode of maps that were fairly tightly constructed. They mostly commented on each other, and they had this nice little build-up at the end. But now we're going into the jungle, and we're going to throw all of that out. But first, here we are with Dead Simple, which is one of the most famous Doom maps ever, I guess. And I should have mentioned before, but it is by Sandy Petersen and American McGee. And it makes sense that it was done partially by American McGee because it is also very tightly constructed. But this map is going to very suddenly throw us into the fray and introduce two new enemies that we haven't seen before once we hit the switch. And that's something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see. And I think that's part of the reason why this map is famous. The other reason is that the way that you fight in this map, the way that the combat is, it kind of throws you into an arena and you just have to sort it out. You have to run around, you have to find cover and kill these guys. And like, by the standards of a modern Doom map, it's not particularly hard or complicated. But by the standards set by, the first 6 maps of this game or any of the previous maps in Doom 1, this is kind of crazy and kind of complicated, or not complicated, but kind of like unexpected. It's pretty scary. I actually died here because I'm an idiot. And you're not necessarily going to know because these are new enemies. You don't know how strong they are. You don't know how to predict their fire pattern. And like the Mancubus, these are Mancubi, by the way, Mancubodes, Mancubus, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, that is really embarrassing that I died. Their fire pattern is really strange, like the way that they fire those fireballs. It's not necessarily exactly what you would expect. And I often get fucked over by them because I'm not paying attention. But yeah, an interesting fact of this map is that killing all these guys makes the walls lower and then will introduce the arachnotrons. But there's actually a script in this particular set to this particular map that causes it to do it automatically once you've killed all the enemies. There's no trigger like that in Doom by default, and so it was hard-coded into this map. And because of the fact that it was hard-coded into this map, it means that there's a litany of every sort of Doom megawad, Doom 2 megawad made by fans or amateur mappers almost always has a Dead Simple map, partly in order for them to use that thing that is hard, that script that is hard-coded into the map. And so it's sort of created almost like a cliche, or I don't know, like it's almost like this expected thing that once you get to map 7, if you're playing a megawad, there will be a variation of Dead Simple. And there's actually a pretty good video about it from a series of Doom modders. It's called Evolution of the Wad, and it's specifically their video about Dead Simple, so it's worth checking out. And yeah, here we see arachnotrons. They're like tiny versions of the Spider Mastermind, except they shoot plasma. They shoot very fast, it's the fastest enemy projectile in the game, so it's definitely, even though they're fairly weak, it's definitely something that you need to take seriously. And yeah, this is kind of like, there's been a pretty linear progression up to this point, in terms of the scale and size of the maps. Like the maps got bigger from 1 to 6 basically, and this is throwing that out. But another interesting thing about this map was that it was originally just made by Sandy Petersen, and there was a beta version that was released recently, I think by John Romero, of this map that's completely different, that was made by Sandy Petersen. And supposedly, so yes, killing all the arachnotrons also caused a platform to lower. That's also hard-coded into the map, and that is to the end of the level. And this is also a great map for deathmatch. And here I'm going to show you the secret exit that you can only get to through multiplayer. So it's not enabled in single player. You have to no clip to get to it. But anyway, what I was saying about the beta map is that supposedly, like, I don't know if it was Romero or American McGee, but either one of them said that the Sandy Petersen original Dead Simple was just totally dreadful, like it was fucking awful. So they made a new map, and like, yeah, I did play that map, and it is kind of like, it's very spare and very open, and it's not really like, it's very anticlimactic and weird. So it was definitely a good move to revise that map. But now we're into a very bizarre, probably the strangest set of 3 maps in any like first-person shooter game that I can think of. And this is probably the least strange of the 3. Like, they get stranger as they go on. And by strange, I don't necessarily mean good, but you'll see. This is called Tricks and Traps. It's a pretty famous map in Doom 2. Also because it has a theme. Like, it's a gimmick map. Like, we sort of saw that with the Crusher, right? Like, the Crusher has a Crusher. The name is the Crusher. But then the Crusher, like, had that second half of the map that didn't really have to do with it. Even though the structure was a little bit different than the other maps before it, it still was kind of like, you know, a proper map. This is pretty much just Tricks and Traps. It's this, like, this setup which people from the Doom community have called it a hub spoke, basically. Like, that, you know, it's basically just like you have a main hub area and then everything sort of extends off of that. And this map, you only need to go to 3, actually in 3 of the doors. This is one of the required doors that you have to go into, and it's actually very easy provided you don't fire. But of course you're going to freak out if you walk in here. You see a cyber demon, you see all these barons, you see that invulnerability. You're probably going to grab the invulnerability and start firing, but it's a huge waste of ammo, so it's not what you want to do. And yes, you are stuck in here once you come in here. As with many of it's just a common thing in Sandy Petersen maps. So yes, this map is by Sandy Petersen, and it's probably the most famous, other than like maybe Barrels of Fun. This one and that are probably the most famous gimmick maps in Doom 2, which are both by Sandy Petersen. And yes, I have no idea where the Cyber Demon actually teleported to, because I don't actually encounter him in the rest of the map. It's possible he died. Oh, I think he might have actually died. But yeah, I was like very confused about that. But yeah, all these other side areas aren't really required, and the structure is really weird. Like, it's, I think the good and bad thing about Sandy Petersen maps is you don't exactly know what to expect, and like some areas just have way more detail going on in them than others. Like, this room is pretty empty. There's a area that I'm gonna go into after this that is like very empty too. But I guess the trap here is that all these imps that are in that pit, once they walk up to the wall sort of near you, end up teleporting behind you. So it's not exactly a huge trap, but it's but all these doors like lock behind you when you come into them, so you're kind of stuck here by default. That's why it is really like there's that sort of cliche about the Sandy Petersen maps, is that if you get lucky and go in the right door, then you have a much better, much easier experience of the map than if you get unlucky and go in the wrong places. So it is kind of like a trial and error and just straight up chance type situation, which is interesting. Many people have remarked on the fact that his design background, so he was not an experienced designer by any means. He's not an artist, which is very apparent from his maps because they lack detail oftentimes. But he was a very experienced designer, primarily, I think he worked on like Command and Conquer or something. But like primarily on the RPG Call of Cthulhu, which is still well known today. He helped sort of create the rules. and the design of that game, as far as I know. And now he teaches game design, I think, at the Guild Hall at SMU. As far as I knew somebody who like took a class with him. But anyway, his sensibility, as many have said, feels very like Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon inspired, in that it is very encounter based, and also like the shape of the rooms. If you think about that, like these rooms like are kind of shaped differently. Like they're not like the hallways of American McGee. It doesn't feel like a contiguous space as much. It feels much more like a place that is constructed for these specific encounters. That doesn't necessarily have an overall coherency, but I guess is just this like malevolent space or whatever. And I said this many times in my other video, but he's also a Mormon, so you can think about him as like being somebody who's invested in the idea of hell and like trying to make it, you know, demonic and confusing and stuff. And I actually think he does a quite good job with that, more so than the other mappers. Like his maps do kind of embody the idea of hell, in that it is like hell is oftentimes going to be ugly, it's going to be unpredictable, it's going to be confusing. And it's not really something that matches with modern level design dogma by any means. People expect things to be playable and approachable, I guess. But that's not really a bad thing. There are some things about his maps, though, that I don't think particularly hold up, and I guess I'll get to those when we get to the next map. But it's kind of like I'm going to all these side areas, and you can pretty much just see like what the traps are in them. This one had this thing where you open up the columns and like you get secrets from that, but then it opens up a bunch of pain elementals, which is another new enemy, I guess, introduced on this map. And boy, are they a pain in the ass. Like they're probably the most hated new Doom 2 enemy, because they keep spawning in Lost Souls, and you have to kill them quickly or they're just going to keep spawning in Lost Souls. It's really freaking annoying. And a lot of modern Doom mappers won't use them, or will use them very sparingly because people find them annoying. Yeah, so here's a room, like this room just looks unfinished, basically. It looks like he didn't have time to like go over this room with more detail. It's just huge and empty. And I know that this room is designed specifically for this encounter with the demons, the pinkies, but it is very weird. Like it feels kind of off kilter, and it's interesting in that like this is kind of a gimmick map, so maybe that isn't really bothersome because you kind of expect it to feel a little different from another map. But this sort of continues in a lot of his other maps that aren't necessarily gimmick maps, like the next one, the pit. And it just feels weird. There's also not really any like, if you want to talk about like flow, and I think I have mixed opinions about flow. Flow is kind of the idea of spaces contiguously connecting with each other, and I think a lot of John Romero's maps are a perfect example. Circle of Death, which will be at the end of this episode, or the end of the next episode that I'm doing, the next video, is a really good example of a space with flow. But these just kind of feel like, it just feels like you're in a boxy room and then you kind of back out of it or double back out of it, or you just step in a random teleporter that puts you on a different side of the map and you don't really know where you're going. I do like that aspect of his maps. It's hard because his maps are very unique, but it's also like hard to not notice that the vibe and the sensibility of the game have already changed, and that it is not just going to be contained in this gimmick map, that it's going to sort of go over to the rest of the maps. And I think part of that is just because, one, I don't think that Sandy Petersen had as high of standards about like visuals on a map and like In Doom 1, like, he did have to do a lot of work in a very short period of time, but, like, quite a bit of that was touching up Tom Hall maps that were mostly finished. But here he's designing pretty much all his own maps, except for, with one notable exception. Well, and the collaboration that he did with American McGee on the previous map. And he carries so much of the brunt of, like, Doom 2. I think he did, like, almost half of the maps in Doom 2, and you can really tell that I think he's just being stretched pretty thin. Like, especially, I think he got hired 3 months before Doom 1 was complete, and probably was just, like, exhausted trying to complete all of these things at once and just didn't have time to, like, go over it. Plus, he just didn't have the, like, interest or attention to detail that the other mappers had. And he was really expected, because he was the lead designer, to do that. I think part of that also has to do with, like, the relationship between John Romero and Tom Hall was very tight, and, like, Tom Hall was always the designer who was doing the majority of maps, because he can just do that. Like, he just makes things very, very fast, and they're very all over the place, very varied. But, like, Tom Hall is an amazing designer, and I think his absence is really felt on Doom 2. I still think Tom Hall doesn't get nearly the credit that he deserves, and hopefully with him being recognized through his map, episode 2, map 2 of Doom 2, or Doom 1, that map was voted by Doom World as the best map in Doom. Like, hopefully that is the kind of thing that helps him get more recognition as a designer, because he just was never as, like, you know, as much as I love John Romero, he's a very brand conscious, brand savvy guy, and he was always kind of branding himself to be a celebrity, so people know his names, they know his maps. And he is a very good designer, but, like, he is such a recognizable name, whereas, like, I think Tom Hall was really the secret weapon of this company, and when he left, there was kind of a gaping hole. And it's felt a little bit in Doom 2, but I think it's felt even more, you know, with their games afterwards, with Quake 1 and such. But anyway, yeah, here's a nice little secret. There are these nice little side areas, but this place being so big and, like, barren, I don't really know it just doesn't feel like there's an overarching idea or philosophy behind the space. Whereas, like, in Doom 1, even though the spaces were kind of incoherent, like, it felt like they had a clear identity. But these maps don't really. This map doesn't really. It's kind of like a tech base a little bit, but the spaces are too kind of abstract and designed specifically around the encounters to really have any clear identity. It basically just feels incomplete, honestly. And the ideas, like, the overall, like, ideas are still there. I think in terms of, like, ideas, Sandy Petersen's maps are a lot more exciting than, like, American McGee. And in that sense, like, he's a better designer. But in terms of feeling, like, complete, like, overall complete, like, self-contained experience, Sandy Petersen's maps just feel weird, and it feels very weird to have this map and the later maps be right after, you know, those cohesive maps that we saw, because it's like a bunch of abstract blobs as opposed to these tight, like, rectangular, detailed rooms. And they're very under detailed. Like, it's almost the exact opposite. They're almost like polar opposites of each other. And the game gives you no real warning of that. At the same time, I feel like almost happy, like, if I'm playing Doom 2, once I get through the first 6 maps, because I know that, like, what those 6 maps are preparing you for is kind of a lie. Like, it's not what the game is. So it's almost a relief when you get through them, because then you can get onto the actual game. Here's the exit. Here's another one of those notorious pits of death. Like if you don't run on those platforms right, then you just die at the very end of the map, and if you don't save, that's incredibly frustrating. That's probably the most notorious pit of death. But there's also a secret that like a teleporter opens up if you run in that room and then back out, which is actually kind of hard to do. Then a teleporter will open up on this side. I don't know. I guess like maybe it thinks that you like run onto those platforms and you run back seeing like, oh no, I'm not going to make it. Then it gives you like a way to finish the map. But it's so easy to just get trapped in that pit that it feels kind of random. It might have another purpose, but I don't know. I guess that's the thing with the Sandy Petersen maps is that the intent of the designer feels so mysterious sometimes that it is actually kind of interesting. Like, but it makes it feel very weird, which does make it feel very hellish, but it's also like, I don't know, it's hard to know what the intentions actually are. Okay, here's one of the most notorious maps in Doom 2. When I first played Doom 2, this was the map that I was just like, wow, this map sucks. Like, I hate it. This is one of the weirdest maps. I don't know, because it's called the Pit, and I guess it's themed around pits, but the whole space here doesn't really have coherency with the last map. I can sort of see it in that this feels a little bit tricks and trapsy like too. Like there are like a lot of like tricky things in this map, especially in this like trap that I'm about to walk into. But this map has no flow. It's one of the most bizarrely designed maps that I can think of. But I almost have a weird appreciation for it. Like, it's like when you see a movie, like, it's like the movie The Room or something. You see something and it just seems so bad, but there's this kind of hidden level of, like, genius to it or something that maybe you just can't understand or appreciate, but it's somehow there. And I think The Pit is like that for me. When I first played the game, because of my expectations, I was like, wow, this is terrible. But now I'm kind of like, have this weird begrudging appreciation for it. This room is part of why, like the textures, that's like the door texture. This is another pit of death. And then this trap is like awful. This is like one of the worst traps in Doom 2, I would say. For many reasons, like there's so many chain gunners here. And I should have just shot rockets at them, but then you have these lost souls, which makes shooting rockets really, really hard because they'll run up on you. If you don't run correctly into and to grab that rocket launcher, and you're not on that platform as it lifts, you're in another pit of death here. You're dead in this trap. And this is not a required area of the map. It's just to get that rocket launcher. Maybe it's expecting that you will, because you can pick up the BFG elsewhere in this map. Maybe it's expecting that you come back to this. But it's one of those things that, like, is a common trait of Sandy Petersen maps. If you go to one area before you go to the others, then you're way more screwed. And also, this is just a total self-contained area that has nothing to do with the rest of the map. I don't even know. I guess there's sort of a pit that you're walking into. I guess that's the theme. But then this is kind of tech-themed, this area, which the rest of the map really isn't. It makes no sense to me. Like, just any kind of coherency of this makes no sense to me. The central pit, like, you think it would be kind of a hub area in the way that Tricks and Traps is, but like really just this part and one of the other lift areas is where you go to, and then these two with the yellow key door are just the end of the level. So it's not really a hub area. Actually, if you look in the map, there's an area that's sort of in the center of the map that I'm going to go to shortly that really does feel like the hub part of the map, but it's not like where you start. And that area is more interesting than the pit. Like, the pit is a very boring space. It's square and it feels like really ugly. This map is really barren too, and the spaces are very like, they're very weird. Like, it feels like you just turn a corner and like you don't know. I don't know, like the flow in this map is the most like bizarre thing. I don't even know how to describe this map. It's such a bizarre map, and like it's not good, but I can't say that it's like bad either. It's just weird. Okay, and then you have this outdoor area, which it seems very strange to be going outdoors right now. And this is very under detailed also. But then there's this lift that goes up and down, so it is kind of memorable. But it's really just this container for like a shit ton of enemies that you just like circle around and fire. So it's not like boring, but it just doesn't feel like it makes any sense with the map. Again, maybe the only sort of connecting thread tissue here is that it is a pit, like, that you're walking into, which, okay, yeah, I guess I can see that. It makes no sense to me. And the theme is different too. Like, the theme is it's brown out here. It's brown out here, but it's like this weird tech stuff on the inside. And sorry, I'm searching for something. It just, I don't understand this map. This area feels like the factory or one of the later maps. Like, this feels like maybe a preview of the city areas that are to come. And you can get the a BFG from here. But again, it's not an area that's required, even though it feels like it's necessary to go here. It's totally not. It's just a place with more enemies. Maybe it's sort of like a pit in that way. This map is it's like a thing that sucks you in to some kind of like, this map is a pit in a way. Like, you think that you expect something kind of more interesting, but then it just sucks you down this like wormhole of like, okay, what was the point of that? Like, it's like this map feels like almost being in a pit, which again is like one of those things that it feels almost intentional. Or it feels intentional enough for me to admire it. But then again, it's not like really good necessarily. But it is kind of interesting. But not enough to where I'd be like, wow, this is like really subversive or weird. Because it is kind of incomplete and janky. I don't know. It's so hard to describe. I'm going to see how Linguisa on Doomworld describes it. He says, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Sandy Petersen map to file away under the category of normal, and certainly the pit is not one of these, with its rampant swings in balance and unconventional gameplay ideas. But most of what defines levels like the pit are those ideas are in those ideas and not whatever centralized idea it is that binds them all together. The titular pit, for instance, is a recessed hub with elevators. Bang goes that application. Impotent pain elementals. The pain elementals that I was just fighting, I guess because there's so many lost souls in the map, will oftentimes just not spit lost souls, which makes no sense. Okay, here's the room that feels like the hub room of this map, because it is actually in the center of the map on the auto map. It has kind of an interesting feature with this like weirdly shaped staircase, and then there's an area like the place with that like bizarre chain gunner rocket launcher trap like looks into this area too. So this is really what feels like the most interesting part of the map. It's also like non-orthogonal. It's kind of interestingly laid out, which is again, because this area exists, like is part of the reason why I have a begrudging respect for this map. Anyway, to continue with Linguisa. The rocket launcher trap, the bit where you go up and down again a lot. Christ, I don't even know what to call that part. There are starts and moments that help separate the normal from the noteworthy, whether or not you can bear to stand them. And if the pit sails through, then you can bet your bottom dollar it's off the strengths of those events. He's talking about in terms of the voting, because this was on the April agitation thread. But no, this is not one of the the more well-regarded Doom 2 maps by any means. And I was reading like a Reddit thread about, people saying they didn't like the design in Doom 2, and having a lot of the same sort of complaints that I did, really. But I saw multiple people in particular mention this map as being like the worst map. And I think it is because it just sucks all the momentum out. Like, all of a sudden you're in a completely different game that feels almost incomplete. It feels like amateurish. And yet, like, upon revisiting, I don't know. I haven't played another Doom map that feels like this one. It is very unique. I wouldn't like say that it's good, but it's a unique piece of art in like the way that a lot of the Sandy Petersen maps are. Like they don't have really like there are some ways in which they are very smart and very ingenious, and then there are other ways that are really just like not like necessary or don't really add anything. Like, you know, death pits or like these rooms being really under detailed. Like it doesn't really, it just feels rushed, but at the same time you can't really object to that because it is kind of interesting. And like when you go back, it's like I think I look on it more fondly than I did when I first played this. So I guess this area is a bit tech themed, but like if you think about the tech themed levels in Doom 1, they're oftentimes like these big hallway spaces. They're very interconnected, whereas here it's just like big giant slabs of rooms. And if you look on the auto map, like the area that I was in, like that area with that weird staircase that I walked up to that I said is kind of like the hub area. Once you go in through that, there's this room with 3 different doors, 3 different like slab doors that you can open up, and this is one of them that I'm in. And then there are 2 more that I'm going to go into. This one has the key. The other ones are not necessary. I don't even really know why they're there. I mean, I guess one of them is kind of interesting. But they just feel like giant slabs. Like they feel like someone just drew a giant slab and are like, okay, this is like one localized area, and then just did a general idea, and then that's it. Like it's so strange because it's so much more abstract. It's so much more like it's something a 12-year-old would do, but that's like not really bad in a way. It's different. Yeah, okay, this is the room that I was talking about. So here's probably the most interesting of the 3 rooms because it's this weird staircase. This is like a staircase, but it's not a staircase because every single thing steps down. Like you think that you can go right, but no, you can't go right. There's nothing to be gained by going right. You can't go right. It'll just teleport you back. So that's a trap, I guess. So that sort of feels like tricks and traps, I guess. So the only other way to go is go forward, right, where all these guys are firing at you. And yeah, all the encounters too, like, feel very just weirdly incidental. But you run forward, and that lowers down a lift, and then you run forward, and then that lowers down a lift, and then it just goes and goes and goes. And it seems very straightforward, but it actually becomes very confusing to navigate. Like, if you go backwards, like... then you kind of end up getting stuck and having to redo that stair again. It's kind of an interesting idea, actually. But again, it feels very self-contained compared to the rest of the map. Like, I couldn't tell you what the philosophy or reason behind it was, beyond the fact that maybe you're just plummeting downward. Like, maybe that really is the theme of the map. I can sort of see that. But I don't know. It doesn't give you... The map is called The Pit. It's not necessarily called, you know, the pits. Like, so you expect the pit to be the pit that you start out in, and not necessarily these other pits that I guess are theoretically related, but in terms of the way that the map is designed, seem just totally thrown in. Like, it seems almost not intentional. And then you could totally just run to the right here if you wanted to, into that toxic waste, and I think just grab those extra items. I'm not positive on that. I guess I'm about to figure that out. But yeah, this is definitely an interesting idea, but like, what the hell is going on? Like, what is the purpose of this place? The design philosophy is so different from what you've seen before. It's so strange, and even compared to Doom 1, you know, Inferno, which is mostly by Sandy Petersen, even compared to that, some of these Doom 2 levels, particularly the pit. Oh yeah, and these two teleporters that just send you back. Like there's nothing that they do. One of them sends you into a pit, I guess. Like what is I guess that's kind of clever, but it doesn't give you anything major. Like, you know, in a John Romero map, or, you know, maybe another map by a different mapper, if there's teleporters there, they're significant. Like they really have a significant use, but those teleporters just kind of are there to be there. Like they don't actually need to be there. This is the most hilarious room of them all because there's nothing to be gained by going in here other than fighting pain elementals. All you do is run to the one side and you're like, oh, okay, I have to do that to activate. It's just a total trap. Like there's no reason to even go in there. This is just a total... but I don't know, the fact that, like, it's almost like you're unveiling or you're unlocking this area too, because, like, if you think about, like, the things that open these doors aren't just normally going up to them and opening them. It's like you have to hit a switch, and they're not doors, they're like walls. So it's almost like you're unveiling or you're unlocking that part of the map here in this central area. Like it's almost like there's like a master key or something. But then getting back out of here too is weird because the door is just a wall, which I kind of like, but it's a little bit strange. I guess this area is probably the most complete area, that little hub area of the map, and the one that makes me like not completely dismiss this map, but it's just the weirdest map. I don't know. If anybody in the comments of this YouTube video has any kind of insight or thought into, you know, what this map is trying to bring, I'm really curious. Or they just have like, or maybe they really like this map, or like something in particular about it. Because I just don't even know, like, I can't even call this map bad in the way that, like, you know, there are maps that are totally incomplete and just feel like underdone, like Nirvana in map 21 in Doom 2, which I'll get to later, feels just kind of incomplete and kind of just like a disappointment mostly, because we've seen other hell maps in Doom 1 that were much more detailed than this one. But I wouldn't say that was the problem with this map, because there are areas, like this exit area is actually pretty neat. There are areas that have their own coherent identity. So it's almost not even right to call it a bad map. It doesn't even feel appropriate, because it's not even about being bad or good. It's like existing on its own sort of plane, its own plane of existence that is beyond my understanding or comprehension, which is I find fascinating about it. But it's also like not enough, not like cohesive, not coherent enough for me to feel like, wow, this is really genius. It's more like, wow, this is interesting, but not, I don't know. I struggle describing the pit. And the next map is going to be the weirdest of the three maps that I just talked about. Tricks and Traps, the pit, and then Refueling Base, which is about to come up. So stay tuned for that. Boy, am I going to enjoy talking about this map, because it is something. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for more videos.